Before this video starts, I just want to give a very big thank you to everyone who has been supporting the podcast over the last 8 months, helping us achieve goals that we could only dream of achieving in years. So this means if you are enjoying our content, make sure to give us a subscribe and like this video. This shows us that you are interested in our content and you want to see more. And the more likes and views and subscribers we get, the higher the chance that we can get higher achieving guests on. So it means a lot. Enjoy the video.
Morning. So thank you for joining us, Steven Barret. Would you be able to introduce yourself for our viewers, please?
I'm Steven Barret. I'm a barrister. I was called to the bar 21 years ago, so I've been in practice for some time. I now work almost exclusively in the High Court and in arbitration. I also started a sort of journalistic career about 4 years ago, publishing initially in The Spectator, but now I've published in quite a lot of places. And from the writing, I've then been invited onto various portions of the media. I appear regularly on a variety of stations. I've actually been everywhere. Probably the one I'm most proud of is to be on Radio 4's The Moral Maze. But I am regularly in the media. I think the one that was most seen, certainly by my friends, was I was on ITV News just after the Britain's Got Talent final. So everybody who didn't bother turning over from the Britain's Got Talent final saw me on ITV News. So that probably ended up being the one where I got most messages saying, "Did I just see you on the telly?" And that's been very joyous. I spent 13 years setting up and building up a charity, a children's charity, that helps young people access the law and the Constitution, and through that develop skills that gets them into good universities and hopefully gets them good jobs. And I've just stepped down from that, but I volunteer for another national charity called the Social Mobility Foundation, where I mentor young people into university and into good jobs. And that is, broadly speaking, me.
Robert?
Okay, so thank you for doing that. So could you share a bit about your journey of becoming a barrister?
Yes, so I grew up in a very normal household. My nan, so my paternal grandmother, was in a 2-up, 2-down in Wavertree with an outside lav. My gran, the proudest achievement of her life was to buy her council house. So we're pretty normal. And I'm the first in my family to get A-levels and the first in my family to go to university. And I was very, very lucky in that I got to go to Oxford University. And I really blagged my way into reading law. I really had absolutely no idea what law was really at all. And then in an act of sort of real divine luck, I actually really liked law. And I don't know if that sounds shocking, but certainly when I was studying law as an undergraduate, it was very common for all the lawyers to walk around going, "Oh, I wish I'd read English. Oh, I wish I'd applied for history." And they were all just very upset with the fact that they had to read law because it's an awful lot of work and it is very hard and it's alien to a lot of forms of thinking. We don't really teach law in school. There are some nominal qualifications, although I don't think they're actually terribly useful, and they're certainly not widely studied, and they certainly weren't available at my school. But law is a way of structuring your thinking. So once you start to do law, I think it does change how your mind works. And I think I'm fundamentally have been a lawyer since I was 19, because it
Podcast
just...
episode is sponsored by Loscombe Drinks.
Loscombe Drinks was founded in 1997 by Gabriel. Gabriel discovered that if you did not want to go for the alcoholic options, then the drinks choices were very limited.
Often limited to lime sodas and other uninteresting beverages, not even close to the qualities of craft beers and fine wines.
Therefore, he set out to create his own grown-up soft drink choices.
Loscombe Drinks uses high-quality organic ingredients from Italy and Peru to ensure quality in each of their drinks.
Now, my favourite is the Cilician orange juice, as the orange juice is fresh. The oranges are picked fresh from the volcanic Etna. And not only that, but there's an incredible one called Cilician Lemonade. It's not carbonated, it's fresh, it's a nice palate cleanser. If you would like to check them out or get your hands on one,
go to loscom.co.uk or use our link
since I
in
was
the description.
19, because it just forces you to think and structure your thoughts in a way that other academic disciplines, to my mind, don't seem to. And that's really how I became a lawyer. And I, as I say, I just got lucky in that I really liked it. Now, that wasn't obvious to begin with, because in the first two terms at Oxford, you study 3 subjects and then you're examined on them. And if you mess up, you get kicked out. So it's quite stressful. And unfortunately for me, those 3 subjects, well, one of them was Roman law, which is what we call a civil law system. So we're a common law system, and Roman is a civil law system. And I have a common law brain. I just do. I don't get on with civil law systems. So I didn't really get on with Roman law. I wasn't terribly bad at it, but I didn't really like it. It doesn't feel natural to me. My brain doesn't naturally follow the way that it's ordered. We often call civil law systems, they're the legal systems of dictators. And the common law system is a much more democratic, much more evolved system of law. And my brain is much more democratic and much more evolutionary focused. There's a real intellectual divide between Plato and Aristotle. And common law is much more Aristotelian. And my brain is much more Aristotle. So I didn't really get on with Roman law. The other one of the 3 was criminal law, which I loathed because it's vile. I mean, it's absolutely gross. I had to sit there in a law library reading cases about the most horrendous things that humans had done to each other. I mean, really just disgusting things, and the real the cruelness of humanity, the monstrousness of humanity, which is not, I mean, I'm lucky in that I live a life where I can largely avoid that. You know, I can largely, and I want to largely avoid that. So I really just didn't like criminal law on a sort of visceral level. Because it is just, it's just gross. It's mean, it's cruel, and it's also, I mean, even from the other point of view, it's putting people in prison, and it's just, I mean, I remember I was reading the first subject we do is we did the first week was criminal damage. And I couldn't really believe that these often young men were going to prison for really just things that were just stupid mistakes. They were tiny accidents. I remember a case of one guy who was trying to prove to impress a girl, that he could do excellent karate kicks. And he was doing this in front of a plate glass window, and he messed up and he smashed the window, causing the shop, vast amounts of damage. And he went to prison for that. And that just struck me as just vindictive. It was just an accident. So I really didn't like crime, and I've never really liked crime. I will talk about it in public. I don't think criminal law's in any way more complicated than any other law, and that there is a reason that most universities teach it in term 1 of the first year. But on a visceral level, I didn't really like it. So what helped me get through that exam was constitutional law, which was the 3rd of those subjects. And I absolutely adored constitutional law and learning about the British Constitution. And that love of constitutional law has never left me. Now, you can't really practice in constitutional law. I mean, even Lord Panic, who's probably our leading practitioner in it, doesn't just do constitutional law, because you wouldn't get enough work. There's not enough going on. You can study it academically and you can teach it, but what I did was, ever since studying it in 1999, I've carried on studying it, and I read everything on the Constitution. I buy the book when they come out. I read academic papers on it, and I carry on studying the Constitution, which is why I feel able to say to people I am a constitutional lawyer, and to talk on it in public. I also do a lot of the Constitution, or did a lot through my charity. We're constantly engaging with issues of the Constitution, and I think it's quite important, because there was a nice. I wrote an article in the Spectator saying about how our Constitution deals with international law, and some people were very rude about that. But then shortly afterwards, the Supreme Court came out and said exactly the same thing, which is effectively saying, therefore, that I'm right. And when he did so, the president of the Supreme Court said that there was widespread misunderstanding of the Constitution. And I think that's right. And I think that comes from the fact that we've spent time inside the European Union, and the European Union is made up of lots and lots and lots of different member states, but 90% of them have the same constitution, or basically the same constitution. And we are an outlier. We're an oddity. Our constitution is not like theirs. So you spend sort of 40 years with them, and they're all basically assuming that everybody has the same constitution, and we don't, then it does actually lead to quite a bit of misunderstanding. It's perfectly natural. And once we came out of that, our constitution, a bit like sort of a memory foam cushion that's been sat on for a while, springs back. But the people who are sort of talking about it didn't necessarily grasp that as quickly as they might have done from 2016. And so there was a period of constitutional confusion. I like to think we're broadly out of it. But one of the many reasons I carry on talking about the Constitution is that danger of people misunderstanding it. And that was really my path to law. Once I fell in love with constitutional law and I managed to get through that exam, I didn't ace it, and I wasn't made a scholar, but I very safely got through that exam. I was then, to my sort of legal mind, I was out of the sort of the proving ground and into the place, because then I got to study all sorts of very exciting law from my point of view: contract law, tort law, equity and trusts, even land to an extent. I like to tease land lawyers, but it's still there are still joyous elements to land if you look hard enough. And then once I left university, and I like to stress this as well, the legal learning didn't stop there. So I wasn't taught banking law at university. I have had to learn that myself, and I did a secondment at the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, and I've brought in some banking law into existence. I've written some, I've drafted some myself, drafted something of what we call the perimeter, and I had to learn that. And there are other legal skills that I've had to learn. I've gone and got a secondary qualification in arbitration. So I had to study that. I had to learn what arbitration is, learn about the Convention and the Arbitration Act, and carry on developing legal skills. And that's what being a practitioner makes you do, because my job is to be at the cutting edge of law. And if you have to be at the cutting edge of law, well, then you're going to have to carry on learning law for the rest of your life. And I've got a very close friend who went the other way. He went to be a solicitor, and he's very open about the fact that he sort of didn't carry on learning law, and I have, and I will learn some law today, and I'll learn some law tomorrow, and that will carry on. And I don't ever really intend to stop. I don't intend necessarily to retire. When I was young, I used to think I wanted to be a judge. I really don't like the idea of being a judge. I don't think judging other people is actually something I would enjoy. And that's no criticism of judges at all. It's just you come to sort of realize who you are later on in life. And by not becoming a judge, I'll avoid a big pitfall, in that the Blair government put in a retirement age for judges. We didn't used to have one, but they put in a retirement age for judges. And by never becoming a judge, I'll avoid ever having a retirement age. So I will carry on pottering around for as long as I've got clients. And even if I never have any clients, I can carry on writing academically, or carry on writing on law in the Spectator or in the media. And therefore, I think I will just carry on pottering around being a lawyer for basically forever until the end. So that's sort of me in a nutshell.
Perfect. Okay. So, what were your interests in school mainly? Was it always law?
No, because I had no idea what law was. So I really blagged it, and I just bluffed my way through the Oxford interview. I think I sort of fell in love with bits of law during the Oxford interview. So I had a question. I was given you were given a text and given sort of 30 minutes to read it, and then you go in and you answer questions on it. And I was given a case called Carlisle and Carbolic Smokeball, which is a leading case in contract law. And I loved it. And I probably loved contract law ever since my Oxford interview. And I was asked loads of questions on it. And I was laughing, and the tutor was laughing, and we were having fun talking about these difficult questions of constitutional law. And I don't want to people think I was a genius. I mean, I messed up. I was like, at one point, I was like, oh my God, no, I've made a massive mistake. That's wrong. That can't be right. And then we talked about it again, and we fleshed it out. And I was just enjoying contract law. And I didn't get to study it then for another, until I didn't get to study contract until second year. But you know, that I fell in love with it from that. In school, I mean, I had quite an odd sort of educational experience in that up until about 14, I was only really good at maths. And then I was rubbish at English. And then I had a teacher, she's a remarkable teacher. She just came up to me one day and she just pointed at me and said, we're going to get you an A star in GCSE English. And I just went, no, that's never going to happen. And she just said to me, look, you're not going to get any marks in what was called SPAG, spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And she just said, but that's only 20%. That leaves 80%. We're going to get you an A star because my spelling and I mean, we weren't, I mean, I'm a child of the 80s and we weren't taught grammar. I mean, it's ridiculous now, but you can sort of spot us in public life because we're really bad at English grammar because I mean, nobody ever taught us it. Michael Gove has changed education, so I understand children are now taught grammar, but we were not taught it, which was slightly bad. Anyway, that changed my life because then I sort of had a revelatory relationship with English, it having been that thing that you're really bad at that you hate, to suddenly being that thing that, oh, actually, I'm quite good at this. And therefore, I think my A-level subjects changed sort of, and I did English and I did history, I did theatre studies, and I did critical thinking, and I did biology. And those were all great and fun. But I probably, had she not existed, I would probably have gone down the maths route. And it was only really her that changed that element of my life. And it frees you up to a lot more, certainly a different relationship with language. And I've always liked language. I listen to a lot of Churchill speeches. I listen to a lot of people. I've listened to every Churchill speech multiple times. I can recite most of them. I can do a pretty passable impression as well. But I read a lot of poetry. I know a lot of Shakespeare, and all these things I think help with your ability to talk and be interesting when you talk.
Okay. So, how long have you actually been in law? Was it since you were like 19? Was it?
So I studied from 1999 to 2002. Then you do another year of what we call bar school. And then after bar school, I was called to the bar in 2003, and then I went into pupillage. I had a bit of a break, but I have basically been a lawyer for 25 years in my mind and in how my mind works, because I think that's the fundamental one. It changes how you structure your thinking. My landlord tutor, literally, he would say something like, right, you know, you'd read him your essay, and then he'd go, right, I've got 2 points to make on that. Point 1, sub point 1. Point 1, sub point 2, sub point 2, and he literally would structure it the way that we structure statutes. And it makes you. I had great friends who read English, and you sort of notice that their minds were not going the way yours were going, and you started to find non-lawyers quite unstructured. That's not to say that they're not very clever. They're very, very clever. They just don't structure necessarily in the way that we do. Law is very, very disciplined in how it's structured, which is probably why a lot of people didn't enjoy reading it, because a lot of people don't really like having your mind structured into a certain way. I find it very comforting, I have to say. And if I ever get nervous or upset, my best mate tends to ask me a legal question, and we tend to go down the process of law. I don't know if I can explain that in a way, but by doing that, my mind becomes very structured. I become very calm. I become just very centered. I've always imagined that mathematicians and musicians must have this, because law, well, it's really odd in a way, because law can be whatever the nation wants it to be. And in a democracy, we can change all the laws to be however the demos wants them. But despite that, law is nonetheless objective, because you're either right or wrong with what the law is today. I don't need to concern myself with what the law might be in a week, because, if I don't know, if there's a revolution on Friday and a dictator on Saturday, and on Sunday there's an entirely new legal system. Well, that doesn't bother me now. What I care about is what is the law today, and that is an objective truth. You're right or you're wrong. And I think only maths and science and music really offer those sorts of objectives. And maybe law is closer to music in that whilst if you can make any music you want, you can make all sorts of sounds from classical music to rock and jazz, the notes are all the same. The notes are still objectively true. And I find law comforting because of that. It's not really my subjective preference. It's whether I'm right or wrong.
Okay.
No, I can certainly see. So I would personally want to go into law as well, but I do see, if something's more structured, that would make me feel a lot more at ease because it's there in front of you. You're used to it. Uh, your brain's used to it as well. So it certainly, I can see where you're coming from. It's definitely calming. But some people's minds obviously don't work like that. They don't like being in a certain structure, and that they'd prefer to be in a bit of a headless chicken situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So before you just kind of stumbled into law, what were your interests? What were you planning on doing?
Well, I mean, I decided to be a lawyer when I was 12, largely because I knew that they earned money. And I make this very clear to the young people I talk to. I talk to rooms. So far this year, I've talked to 3 rooms full of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and I've always explained to them that I have no shame in saying, if you come from a background with no money, there's nothing wrong with wanting to earn money. Absolutely nothing wrong at all. I'm talking to you from my library in my house, and that's only because I studied law and went into a well-paying legal job. There's no shame in that. There's a judge called Lord Sumption, and he will go and talk to young people, and he already does it in the media, and he will say things like, "Oh, you don't need to study law. You can do another degree and convert later." And the point I always like to make is that that's absolutely true, provided you've got the cash to do a conversion course later. There was no way I was in massive debt anyway. So the idea of studying English and then converting into law later was simply for the birds for me. There was no way I would have had that amount of money. One of my friends, she grew up in Driffield in Yorkshire, and she would have made an excellent barrister, but she decided, and she was very candid about it when we were undergraduates. She's like, I can't afford to be a barrister. The money risks are far too great. So she went to be a solicitor. People have to make rational decisions based on money. There's no shame in that. That's how the world is. So I talk to these rooms full of young people, and I explain that there's no shame in that. I don't want anybody to feel any shame about that. It does mean practically that things like criminal law are not that valid a career option for people who don't have money. But I don't choose how the world works. I don't get to decide how everything is. So all I can do is advise people rationally based upon how the system is. And rationally, if you come from a non-money background, I'm afraid crime isn't that viable an option. It's just true.
I mean, it's definitely true. Within saying, if you come from an unfortunate or poor background, money is definitely the primary thought of of a job, any job really. Becoming a lawyer, especially, people see that as the big bucks. But and as you say, there's no shame in that. If you have more money, then you can get further. There's more opportunities out there for you.
Yeah. And it's, that's just a practical aspect of life. So I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer long before I even knew what law was or what being a lawyer was. And that's simply how it was. As a child, as a young person, you asked me my interests. I mean, I used to play an awful lot of Warhammer. I don't know if anybody knows that, and do a lot of gaming. I've always quite liked gaming and strategy gaming and tactics and that type of thing. I did a lot of acting. So I was, in the school drama club, and I sang a lot. I do like singing. I think I'm on record as saying I do like to do a bit of karaoke. I think singing is a source of joy, and I always go back to my gran, who was, I mean, bless me, I was such an innocent. I must have been 5 or 6, and I just said to my granny, you know, Granny, you always sing, but you're really bad at it. Now, only a sort of 5 or 6-year-old would actually say that, because everybody else has got the grace to not sort of point that out. But, you know, I was very, very young. And to her credit, I mean, she's a lovely woman, and she wasn't in the least bit put out by me saying this. And she just went, yes, I am. I'm not very good at it. But, darling, you know, it gives me joy. It makes me happy to sing. So I sing because it makes me happy. And as a 5 and a 6-year-old, I just accepted that answer. And I went, oh, good. That's great. You carry on singing then. And I've always sort of had that policy. You know, I sing because it gives me joy. Whether it gives the listener any joy is an entirely different question, which is not necessarily for me. But yes, and I'm trying to think. It's a long, you know, I'm quite old, so it's a long time ago that you're trying to make me think about. So I'm trying to sort of think what else I sort of did. But basically, I was just trying to do well in exams and do well, you know, academically, because it was obvious that that's a route to getting money. I mean, and it is. It's not the only route. A great friend of mine is Peter Cruddas, Lord Cruddas. And Peter and I get on. He's not particular. He wouldn't mind me saying, but he's not particularly academically qualified. And he's entirely a self-made businessman because he understood finance. So there are other routes. You don't just have to have academic success. And one of the I think improvements we've seen in modern times is the rise of the apprenticeship route. And I'm really hoping that will work well and provide access to good jobs without necessarily requiring, you know, a university degree. I think funneling everyone into university was largely a mistake, and it has led to the rise of useless degrees, which nonetheless come with a vast amount of debt, and that creates structural societal problems. But that's really for the politicians to deal with, not me.
All right. So you say you're a barrister. What exactly is a barrister in terms of law?
So it's an English tradition, particularly, although I mean the Scots have it in a version, but largely it's sort of the class system, and it's the idea. A lot of it goes back to the practicalities of money. So before the internet, if you wanted to know what the laws, just the statute, there are 2 types of law: statute law and case law. If you wanted to know what the statutes law said, you needed a full bookcase of them all, going back years and years and years, and that would cost you, you know, a serious amount of money. And if you wanted the case law, well, then you're not talking one book, you know, 8 shelf bookcase. You're talking a whole wall of them, and that would cost you serious money then. And even when I started out, when people retired or died, their widow would try and sell on their books, and that was a serious sort of income. It's a serious sort of retirement income for a barrister to sell on their copies of the case law. That's gone with the internet because they're all freely available online. Right. But if you don't have access to those, then you can't really be a barrister. And so being a barrister required, you know, an initial capital outlay, which was really very, very serious. And a barrister is the specialist legal mind, the one who talks to the judge. That's the key. The solicitor might prepare the case. Solicitor might do non-contentious things. Solicitor might convey your house if you buy a house, or there are all sorts of business law, and actually the UK leads on this, and it's a serious source of revenue for the country, and these are seriously important jobs. So don't let me diminish them in any way at all. But the barrister sort of rose out of this sort of class divide idea that we would be the gentleman who had those books, and the solicitor would write to, in the old days, literally solicitors would write to barristers saying, "Oh, can you just remind me what so-and-so statute says? Can you copy that by hand and send it back?" And you'd be paid, like, you know, a bit of money to do that as a junior barrister. I was talking to one of our law lords, and he was joyously remembering that that's what he did as a junior barrister, and that's all he had to do, and it was easy, and it was great because it was good money, and all you had to do was get the book off the shelf, write it down, and send it back to the solicitor.